Welcome to the Live Your Possible podcast, the show about sparking and discovering endless possibilities where we work, live, and play. A safe place where we can help you peel back the cover to what may be blocking you from being your most authentic and happiest self.
I just had the most delightful conversation with Dr. Lynda Ulrich. Don't miss out on this free boost of goodness and kindness to spark more joy in your everyday. Dr. Lynda joins us today as a dentist turned into a social innovator for good. She's the author of her book titled Happiness is an Option, and she's a 3 times TEDx speaker, a world-renowned keynote speaker, podcast host about the conspiracy of goodness, and she started what I believe was the first positive media outlet where she shares positive news for curious people. Dr. Lynda makes most people feel like anything is possible, where her work proves unequivocally that it is still an amazing world and inspires us to go discover our role in it. Sprinkle in some wonderment and open your door to transcendent joy. Enjoy the show. Dr. Lynda, welcome to the Live Your Possible podcast. How are you doing today?
I am so glad to be here. So glad to be here. You're using one of my favorite words, possibility.
I'm excited you're here too, because I think we have so much fun things to cover. And, when I think about you, you're a breath of fresh air. What's good for the world?
That's so kind of you. I think life circumstances have sort of played out for me and that includes ups and tremendous downs and all that kind of stuff. But one thing I was good at was just following that next breadcrumb to something regarding possibility. I feel like I'm standing in a wind with catcher's mitts on my hands, and there's just a wind of opportunity coming at me, and I'm trying to not let anything get by. So
I love that visual. I mean, you are somebody that's very curious, right? You're very positive and helping people to see the world a little bit differently. So I appreciate that visual. You're just showing it already, little bits of pieces, living with wonder. We met from a mutual friend, Sarah Leathers, and I'm curious how you two met, and are you staying in touch with her?
We wrote an article. Her organization, Healing Meals, is so important. We wrote an article for the Big Mother website, the Goodness Exchange, about her, and and there's a wonderful video in it about healing meals and so forth. And my social media person was so impressed by how cool and nice Sarah was. She said, "You should just call her and get her on the podcast." And I did, and we have become fast friends. We are on each other's calendar every single Friday morning at 8:00. Whether we actually are able to meet that or not, sometimes we postpone on each other, but we have been doing that since maybe 2 years, 3.
Yeah. I mean, you both are like two of the most optimistic people I think I've ever met, looking at what's out in the world and seeing what's possible. And like you said, making those ripples or putting those little crumbs out there to follow. I think you're both folks that see the world a little bit differently, and you're connecting in a really powerful way. I think it's incredible about, the people we hang around with and how it impacts our lives, and, keeps us looking at life a certain way. Maybe it's something we read in a book or a podcast we listened to, or just an experience, right? How do I get through this? Or maybe we're there to encourage each other. She's one of those people like yourself.
I've got your book sitting right here by me because I just interviewed you. And one of the things that you and I talked about in my interview with you was this finding a partner or finding people to partner with. And Sarah is one of those people. I just wrote a blog post for our newsletter the other day about how important it is to find somebody who's outside your world, not a coworker, not somebody in your family, but somebody who's really just comes from a different place entirely. And Sarah and I do. If you jive, make the time for those relationships is my point, right? Like we say, oh, sometime we should catch up. Sometime we should, but you never do. But if you put it on your calendar that you're meeting Sarah Leathers or Arthur Zards every single week, you will have a rich and expanded life. So I do tell people to find those kind of people outside their normal life and enjoy being out on the edges with them.
Yeah, I love that too, because I'll tell you, I had a conversation with a good friend today, and I kind of needed to pick me up, and it really did, right? It just, allowed me to see like, wow, I'm excited about talking to Dr. Lynda today. Like, she gets the world in a different way, and she gets to like the way you see it too. And it's good, right? It keeps our eyes open. It keeps us really pushing and expanding the world a little bit differently. Because we all have our day to day. We're all doing things that are part of our routines, part of our jobs, part of how we live. And I'd love to go there next, Dr. Lynda, tell us a little bit about what your day to day look like, and what are you passionate about these days?
You know, I've been a dentist for 35 years, and about 25 years in, 2013, I started to notice my husband and I are both dentists. We have this practice together. So we just go through, conversation after conversations, 30 conversations a day. And we started noticing that people who we'd otherwise known as chipper their whole lives, the negative noise and the media and social media negativity was really starting to beat people down. And so I just snapped. There's a couple of good stories that are the aha moments, origin stories of the goodness exchange. But I about 10 years ago or 11 now, I decided that I was going to share something with the world, one thing a day, to prove it's still an amazing world every day. And that's what I started out doing, was writing an article. I'm pretty well read and I'm traveled all over the world, and I knew folks were never going to see the beauty and wonder that I'd seen in some pretty bleak places. We've traveled with purpose all our lives. And gosh, the generosity of people who don't have very much, and the ingenuity, the way they think of doing things. It's just so inspiring, but that's not what we're going to hear in the negative noise on the media. So, what fires me up is the constant and building volume of stuff that we have to choose from every day to put on the goodness exchange or the people I'm interviewing. I remember when we had about 30 topics ahead of us, way back in the original days, and we thought we'd just run out of good things to talk about. And then that 30 became 300, and then we were like, "Oh no, how do we choose what to shine a light on?" And now I have to have the world's largest to-do list, that I have to meticulously keep track of everybody I want to interview or read something about or contact. So what I'm passionate about right now is sharing this notion that there is an enormous wave of goodness and progress happening right now, and almost no one knows enough about it yet.
First of all, how do people, I'm wondering how they're thinking about it. And you were at a point where you were thinking 30, oh my gosh, we're done. I'm like, that's scary to think about. We're done with that much goodness and positivity in the world. And then thank goodness you found 300, and now it's really getting even bigger. And you said the word yet. So tell us more.
So here's the thing. One of the things that I've learned on this crazy journey is that you will find what you look for. This is the thing. If you're, very, very upset about the politics of our time right now, and you look for the badness in others, you will find it. You will totally find it. But if you are, hoping that the world is actually much better than it seems, and you look for it, you will find that too. Just one excuse after another. And so I tell people to, make sure they make time in their day for that kind of mental health exercise. 10 minutes a day. There's all kinds of studies that just 4 minutes of good news makes you 18% less fearful, 32% more optimistic. 4 minutes a day. So, like, these are Harvard studies, like with real numbers and real volumes of test subjects. I just think it's a message we're not hearing enough of. And I've mentioned before, I feel like the town crier, that we've just got to start looking for it, and you will see what a wonderful place the world still is. But you got to look for it first.
Yeah, you do have to look for it. You have to want to look
Yeah.
for it, and have that level of interest to slow down and notice it too. Because I kind of talked to some stations, and I said, all you guys talk about is negativity. And I finally got on a station on Channel 8 locally, and then I was on in Charlotte for a different reason. Yet it was all about happiness and positivity, and how to instill that back in our lives as part of our everyday. So I love your connection to the 4 minutes, because there's proof. We spend 4 minutes of goodness and positivity. It actually rewards us. What can we do? Are there questions we could ask ourselves, or maybe you encourage people to go to a certain website, or maybe you have materials in the work you're doing?
Okay. So here's the thing. The first thing I want to remind people is that it's not a character flaw to be attracted to or to pay attention to the negative noise. I've interviewed many, many neuroscientists and people that would know this, but it seems we haven't had an upgrade between our ears in 35,000 years. I mean, that's it. Our amygdala, the fight or flight part of our brain, is in charge 100% of the time, even when you're sleeping. Your amygdala is on guard. And so that is how our brains are wired. And all the internet and the news is doing is taking advantage of that. That's all it's doing. There's nothing to stop us each from trying to be our own best human 2.0. Like we can pay attention to the amygdala. Maybe, when we're standing in line at the movie theater and there's this creepy guy behind us and he's looking sideways at our 13-year-old daughter, you know, that's the time to pay attention to your amygdala and make sure you know where he's at when you leave the theater, right? Like there are still times when we
Yeah.
need those kind of defenses, but by and large, there are no saber-toothed tigers jumping around corners at us. And and so I always first start with that when I talk to people about how you start finding and living a life full of more possibility. There's your word, and positivity, my word, is that you say, okay, I have the hardware and software up here just as it was back in the caveman days. How do I live human 2.0? And that is by also pausing. That if you can pause for 2 seconds and something strikes you the wrong way, it just takes 2 seconds to shift up to this part of our brain, the newest part, where we can think long term, where we can be less judgmental, where we can recognize our biases and have a little self-awareness. But it happens here, and you gotta pause when something strikes you badly. And if you can do that, you can shift up to the part of your brain that has access to see all the landscape in front of us, not just the dangerous part, not just the scary part, all of it, which also includes a lot of possibilities like you talk about all the time.
I think it opens up our emotions too. I think it's that we can't just have, bits and pieces of our emotions to experience the most. I don't know what you think and what you think about the word happiness and how you think about that or how you define it. I know you have a book that's called Happiness is an Option, right? So
Yeah, that book, I'm in the process of rewriting it because the website where we have thousands of good news articles, and of course, I'd be remiss not to tell people go there. It's free. We've written thousands and thousands of articles about what's right with the world there in every category, not just puppies and mailboxes stuff, but real science, really important leaps in human potential, all at the Goodness Exchange. I'd have to say that what we need to do is follow those sort of impulses instead of our emotions over a cliff. So that's what's happening when something strikes us the wrong way. Can I give you a story?
oh, please.
Okay. So during the heart of the pandemic, I had patients dying. I lost 4 family members in 6 months, not to COVID, but to related things that wouldn't have happened to them had COVID not been in full swing. Because we're connected with thousands of people's lives, and then we knew all their stories about how COVID was affecting their life. So one day I'm driving down the road in our little Vermont town, and there was a young man sitting on the corner by the stoplight with a giant poster that says, COVID is a fake. Just sitting in a lawn chair with this giant poster. So I have the same knee jerk, contemptuous, not nice reaction in my amygdala that everybody would. But what I've worked really, really hard to do is to pause for 2 seconds, to learn to get that. It's like a muscle. It's not easy at first. Okay, so I carry around a lawn chair in my car all the time because I love to talk to strangers. And if somebody's doing something interesting, I always have this funny little chair in the back of my car and I'll just whip over and go talk to him. So I said, for God's sakes, I'm going to do that with this kid. Even though as mad as I was, I live by the statement, change contempt to curiosity. That's it. I know you have a very similar statement, which I loved.
Yeah, when you're curious, get curious. Yeah.
Yes, I love it. It's just so great, right? So I was feeling contempt. I get out of my car. I make sure I'm upwind of him in case he has COVID, because he doesn't believe in it. So he's not going to care if he gives me it. So I just sat down and I just started talking to him, and we had the loveliest conversation. And I was not judgmental, and I was vulnerable first. We can talk about all those kind of things. How you establish quick connections. Dentist, being a dentist that's really relationship oriented, like my husband and I, we have to learn to connect deeply with people and get their trust and go through hard things together in 30 seconds. So I use that same sort of impulse to love this person before I hated him and to be curious. And we had the nicest conversation. I can't even tell you. It was so enlightening how he came to his sitting there on that corner. And there was sadness in that story, as you would imagine. And accident of birth was part of it too. And, can we blame others for the folks that raised them and how they turned out? That's what I mean by just seeking something different. I have the 4 shifts that I talk to people about. As a part of the 4 shifts, the fourth one is seek signs of goodness and progress. And if you do that, you will find them. So I'm back. I'm like a broken record on that. And I hope that's if your audience doesn't take away anything else, it's just to seek signs of goodness and progress.
Well, I mean, reinforcement's a good thing. I mean, that's how we start to build a different habit, how we get better at things. And I love how you're reinforcing too, that you said, wait a minute, you practice the pause. And you talked earlier about, the things we put in our mind, can come to fruition. So if you were like, oh my God, this person is this or that, and you walked away, that's what you would have believed, and you would have told that story on, and other people would have said, oh my God, I can't believe it, or they would have gone seen it for themselves. And you chose to stop and say, wait a minute, I want to rewire this journey. You took a minute. You really said, like you said, we got to get curious. And it's just funny, we have to kind of you had to kind of reorder your thinking, because initially your emotions jumped in first versus actually saying, wait a minute, I need to understand more, and then have an emotional reaction. Then your emotions actually changed after you got to know more about this person's story. Just that one switch of order, and look what happened.
And the other thing it does is it gives you the opportunity to clear your heart and live with more grace. Because what I didn't think that this would happen, but what happened was every single other person I ever ran into for 2 years who was a non-COVID believer or who said something harsh that didn't jive with my reality of seeing all these people losing loved ones and not being able to go to their deathbed or their funerals or all the things that we saw by being connected with 3,000 people's lives, it helped me not walk around with harshness in my heart, because I could say, well, I knew that one guy's story. Maybe his story is something like that, or maybe her story is something like that too. So
Yeah, that's good.
it helped me not walk around with harshness in my heart, to learn that at least one story that put some of the pieces of the puzzle that I didn't understand together.
Yeah, that is curiosity. I mean, I think about that as like open-minded curiosity. You're willing to actually take a look at it differently and check your perspectives on it and reorient yourselves. I mean, I think it's so powerful, because you talk about differences and how we value that, and what could that look like for us, and how we could change, how we could grow, how we could discover. Again, you're doing that in practice. Like it's like music, the way you're going about this. So this is how you're living your life. And then you have a chair you actually put down. I mean, I've never heard that about you. That's hilarious.
I just always drive around with it in my car because I've done that so many times now, and just am just constantly rewarded by reaching out to strangers. If somebody is, I mean, I don't do it weirdly. If it's, somebody sitting there in a lawn chair, I can certainly pull up my own lawn chair and sit down with them. Or what else? I don't do it weirdly, and I don't take chances. I don't, pull over and talk to somebody who's hitchhiking. If it's just something I don't understand.
You ever videotape those? You ever do a video clip at the end, or just
No, most people are pretty suspicious of it. I have to tell you, that young guy, he kept saying, "Are you recording this?"
how did you enter? Like, how do you enter in that kind of dialogue if someone was courageous to follow your footsteps?
Well, no, don't forget, I was complimenting him. I said, "No, I just think it's pretty courageous to do what you're doing, to make a
Yeah.
poster and sit down on the side of the road. And some people are honking at you and some people are giving you the finger, right. And so I want to understand that, and where do you get your strength? I asked him things like that too. Like, I
Yeah.
was curious about, if you see the positive parts of what he's doing and not just focus on the negative part, how brave it was, or his personal conviction was so strong. What if he applied that to something really cool?
Yeah. Right.
There's potential in this young guy who's only 19 years old. He will, none of us want to be judged by our 19-year-old selves, do we?
No, definitely made a ripple. We don't know what's going to happen, but there's something good likely to happen. And it's funny. It's like, it's about how we show up for people. It's like, funny enough, I was sitting with my daughter last night. She was planning to take her permit test today, which she did. And one of the things in the prep book basically said, when you're waving to somebody, make sure you're using all fingers. That was so funny. So we were both really laughing. I'm like, the fact that we got to tell society to make sure when you're waving to somebody, you're using all your whole hand and fingers. Anyway, But it's just we have to like slow down to teach ourselves to say what does good look like, and there is so much divisiveness, and that's why I say you're a breath of fresh air, and you're helping us to slow it down. Using that pause technique. I know that's one of your speaking topics. I was going to ask you about that, so I appreciate you bringing that up. And you also mentioned a bit around just the negativity in general in the world. I think with online and what people are like arguing about. And I think you have a TED Talk that might be thinking about that area. I know you had a TED Talk, during COVID. If you don't mind just giving us a little bit more about that without giving away the whole show, because I know we're going to get our listeners to go listen to both of those. One in the big, great scenery you have in the background, and then the one that's going to be coming up in Chicago.
It was hilarious. So before we get off the pause subject, I am going to tell you about a TED Talk I did for a really big company in India. That, oh my gosh, the poor guy who was who owned the TED license, he got COVID just 2 weeks after I recorded this thing for them. And then his mother died. It went through his whole entire family. His mother died, and this and that and the other. It was a nightmare because COVID had a pretty rough time. I mean, India had a pretty rough time. So it never got even the slightest light of day published, and it's called The Power of the Pause. And so if folks want to listen to something 12 minutes long, 13, that is just like it's my textbook of how and why we've got to learn to get that 2 seconds in the minute our emotions peak. And I actually think it's good if we can do it when they're over the top high too. Not just the lows, not just the anger, but the highs, because it's those swings that affect us all so badly. But there's the power of the pause is one I would recommend to people, and it's sitting there in the darkness. But all you have to do is look up my name and the power of the pause, and there'll be.
We'll drop that into the show notes. So for folks that want to take a look at that.
Well, it's a very useful technique, and I share 3 things that I do in these moments where I'm challenged to be my most graceful. Okay, then the TED Talk that I'm most known for, and I worked very hard to kind of bring together everything I'd learned after 13 years of celebrating what's right with the world, is called Exposing the Conspiracy of Goodness. Back to that little sentence I said earlier about there's this enormous wave of goodness and progress happening in the world. It was happening during and right before the pandemic and so forth, and we were all teed up. I was going to be the closing speaker at the second oldest TEDx conference in the country, TEDx Naperville. It's called. It's an amazing creator. He's the guy I meet on Thursdays, the owner of that TED license, Arthur Zards. What a creative guy. Oh my gosh.
Wow. See how you're surrounding yourself with somebody else that's pretty profound and creative and connected to the world.
We just go crazy for 1 hour each week. We think crazy thoughts and crazy what ifs, and we reverse everything and turn everything on its side. And he's just such a great fellow. We became friends after this ordeal, because producing a TED Talk by yourself in your cow pasture, learning video equipment and all that during the middle of a pandemic was quite a problem, or well, a challenge. Let's say that it was a challenge, not a problem. You'll see the cow pasture here on our farm in Vermont, and that's where we produced it. I even one of the takes, I had stepped in a giant cow pie right before I climbed upon the rock to start filming. We have pictures of Chuck scraping the cow poo off my shoe.
Oh man.
Yeah, so that's good. It's called Exposing the Conspiracy of Goodness. There's some really the four shifts are in there. These 4 little simple, quick things you can do to see more positive aspects in life. That's in there, and then some really good tips about how to think about the negative news, how to put it in a different place.
And you're gonna continue that again in your talk in November?
Yes. So November, he's asked me to come back and actually do that same talk on the TED stage in November. So on November 9th, we'll get a version of that talk with the normal surroundings.
I wish I had a front row seat. I'm definitely gonna watch it when it comes out. So looking forward to that. I think you're gonna light up the stage as you shine the light on many things.
I tell you, it's back to the catcher's mitts. I feel like that everything that I share, I'm sharing. I didn't come up with it. I was either a fast catch, it's an idea that somebody said something and it connected with another idea that somebody else said. I feel like through that whole talk, I'm just sharing what others in the world has taught me.
How can we teach people to have their catcher's mitt up? Are there a couple of quick techniques where we can get our antennas up to hear those things?
I'll give you a couple that I do. So Have you ever been involved in a conversation, whether it's somebody you meet in the grocery store or somebody you've made a Zoom meeting with that you regret? Like when you're standing there and you're going, oh, I'm never going to get out of this conversation or whatever. Like when you're in those moments with others,
I know what you're talking about. Yes. Yeah.
I'll give you the best. I'll give you the best. Sorry, another story. In my dentistry days, we have to kind of identify ahead of time who are the patients that really like to talk a lot because it's their outing. You know, older folks who come to the dentist, it's their outing. They're all dressed up and it's great, and I love it too, and so forth. But we have to make sure that I'm not needed in 3 other rooms before I go into Mrs. McGillicuddy's room. Okay, so I go in and there's this little medicine bottle with something that looks like a rock in it on the tray. And my hygienist says, and Dr. Lynda, Mrs. McGillicuddy wants to tell you all about her gallbladder surgery. And I'm running behind and haven't planned this right. And it just came to me. I just took that thing out, and we have these little intraoral cameras we use in people's mouths for 17 years. So I'm really handy with an intraoral camera, and it has a magnifier lens on it. And so I said, oh my gosh, this is such a privilege. And I took the little gallstone and we put the magnifier on it, and it looks like the surface of the moon. And we had it up on the big screen in the TV. And then we talked all about that for a minute, and then I dove into her mouth and I was out. So sometimes you just have to be okay with the moment and just find the magic in it. This is what I do when I'm in those conversations, or I'm starting in one that I already know, oh, this could be bad and boring and all this stuff. I'll say, no, what am I supposed to get out of this? What am I supposed to get out of this? And that person will always say something I needed to hear. 100% of the time that happens to me.
Yeah, you're looking for it again. You're setting yourself up. There's something there that's beneficial and good.
Yeah. Or you just make a magic moment out of it by saying, give me that gallstone. Let's look at it up close.
That's a great story. I mean, is that how you brought back some of the positivity back to your patients?
Well, we have just a natural inclination. My husband and I have both, as you may pick up, there's a lot of people who do a lot of good in the world who have had a childhood tragedy. And my husband and I have both had really horrendous childhood tragedies when we were 13 to 15 years old. And that's a funny age to have something dreadful happen. And when you have something like that happen at a young age, it can either, horribly disable your worldview, or it can send you on a great search for something to celebrate. And my husband and I became just really good at finding something to celebrate with every single patient, and that made us do it in our own lives. And then it just became the way we see the world, the way we are in the world. We just find something to celebrate in even the most dreadful moments, and that's a good trick too.
So you're looking for the silver lining, the positive, the learning. Like, how would you describe it?
Well, I'm trying to think of his name. There's a fabulous TED Talk by a monk. I'll think of it in a second. And he says something like this. It's a paraphrase, but he says, in every moment, there may not be something to be happy about, but there is something to be grateful for in every moment. And I don't know, that one hit me. He was one of the very earliest TED Talks. That's one of the very earliest TED Talks. I'll think about that. And I'll give it to you so you can put it in your show notes, because it's a very important talk. And I learned to always do that, to not, to find something to be grateful for. If my patient's life is just really dreadful and falling apart at the seams, I can find something to be grateful for in there and say, well, blah, blah, blah. And so once you get sort of used to doing that, your brain just starts to, again, it's a practice. Like just pulling it together and saying, what am I going to hear from this great person's conversation? This one, this is another trick, right? Just looking around you and saying, in this moment, what is there to be grateful for or happy about? And you can always find it. Always.
Yeah, you're rewiring the path again, right? You're just taking a side step, circling back. It's not like you're ignoring it. It's still there, right? It's not toxic positivity. It's really a path of, I could choose to be miserable and down and out and let this really sack me, or I could try to address it and get something on it out of it so I can move forward.
I'll give you another example, like in a business meeting, when something has gone wrong. Let's say you're part of a nurse's staff and you're in a meeting with doctors and nurses, and it's a big staff meeting and something's gone horribly wrong, and you're there to process it. And everybody is just telling one negative thing after another about the other person or somebody else's fault or whatever the situation. Be the person who finds possibility in the room. is it possible that that person we're talking about, that we just didn't communicate what we wanted from them? Is it possible that they were interrupted by something that we don't even have any idea it happened, that may have been more important than what we were focusing on? Right? Like, in the darkest rooms, be the person who's carrying a lantern for possibility.
It's a great message. And I definitely support that. As you know, we're in the Live Your Possible podcast. And, I believe there's this wonderful light inside of everybody, as as we talked about on your podcast. And when we start to actually believe that, to your point, it's amazing what shows up.
Yes. Because if you just go along with that conversation in the business meeting about how crappy everybody is or how much bad intention they all have, I mean, where's that going anyway? No problem ever got fixed through that kind of machination, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of my favorite guests on this podcast is Mindy Cox. You should have her on yours. She leads with love. She leads with love in every interaction, and it doesn't mean she doesn't have direct conversations. She's kind and respectful, and she commands the best. And guess what? People appreciate it more than you ever know, because they feel like they're cared for. Mindy's being genuine and she's being direct. Yet there's no surprises, because it's already clear on what the expectations are, and there's care and love in the room. And if people are letting each other down, I think there's room to make it right first, and to move it forward. And she's let me lead a little bit more with love. It's like I share that and let people know that. Like, some people say to me, "Oh, you got to be harder to people and harder on people." I'm like, I could be kind and direct. I could help people move forward and have success, and do what's possible. And I love how you keep bringing that back. What is possible is really extending some grace to other people.
Yeah, and sometimes it just is a matter of assuming good intentions. One of my guests taught me this one. Always assume good intentions, and you'll be wrong sometimes, and people will take advantage of you. But the amount of times that will actually happen is so minuscule compared to the amount of times when you assume best intentions, the most amazing things happen. So yeah,
Yeah.
you can't protect yourself from the 5% times people will take advantage of you. But how about opening up to the 95% of times that when you believe somebody has good intentions and you just poke around on the edges till you find what it is? My brother's a good example of that.
Yeah.
He and I don't see anything like each other politically. Oh my gosh, I irritate the heck out of him. And I'm very middle of the road, so that shows you how far he is. But anyway, he's the first guy when when COVID hit, he was organizing with his neighbors to make masks for the local hospitals. He's an airline pilot. He's as clever as heck. On 9/11, I think he would have done something interesting to make a change in the outcome. He's so smart. And yet it would be easy for me to just, brush away all his amazing qualities for the one thing that makes me completely crazy and teach gnashing about him. I mean, like, oh, we've got to get so that we see all of the other person and not just the part that makes us crazy. It's work.
It is work, and it's beautiful work, though. I mean, that's the difference. I think that's the difference when people say, "How are you always thinking about that? Happiness or good stuff or seeing possibilities?" And it's just that, what you said. It's giving others a chance, seeing people's full selves. People have stories, like you said. You've shared some of the traumatic moments with me off air, and there's moments where we got to grow from them, and we decide what we do differently. And you've chosen the path of goodness, and I'm grateful for that, and how you've approached that, how you're learning, right? You're seeking out why and what and how, and you're bringing that back in the world. Like, you created a positive media company. Like, how did you get to that point where you started seeing it? I understand you went through those moments, but like, what did you do after that? Like, what are the steps you took?
Mm. So because I was trying to look from some other narrative, I'll just share this much. So when I was 15, my best son's family was all murdered in a very, very, very bad way. And when that happens to you at 15, and there was not a lot of support of anything back then. And my dad was the town doctor, so I got as much support as anybody could possibly get from a professional point of view, and it wasn't anything. And so I started on a journey. When those kind of things happen to you when you're young, as I mentioned, you either become a tragic story yourself, or you fight your way out into some kind of light. And so I just started reading every bit of philosophy I could get my hands on. I studied religions. I did, Voltaire and Mark Twain and all the great philosophers, and like little nuggets here and there. But when you're 19, 20, 21 years old, who knows how you're picking up on things, right? But then, you become a bigger reader and a world traveler. My husband and I have lived all over the world and drug our kids to godforsaken places, and we were just then even looking for the beauty and the wonder always in places, and always saw it. So it builds like that until you just become this big ball of, gosh, the world's cool. And then when you start seeing your patients suffering, so like we did for a few years, and I just saw some science on that. It turns out in 2010, 11, 12, 13, the science on people's attitudes, it's a giant downward spiral. Yeah, people's hope in the future. It's scientifically documented that it went down strategically. And finally, the morning happened when at 6:30 a.m. one morning, I kept saying, somebody's got to do something about this. Somebody's got to do something about this. When I would see patients that I thought were chipper and they'd be all bummed, or they were giving their kids advice like, don't go to college because you just never know, and the world's going to hell in a handbasket, and you're better to just make all the money you can as fast as like people that weren't short-sighted were suddenly kind of like pulling back because of fear. One day we woke up to our alarm clock, NPR. It was November 13th, 2013. I remember vividly. Our alarm clock woke us up at 6:30 a.m. in the middle of a beheading story. And I just I just couldn't believe it. I'm just like,
Wow.
what? And that's it. I just said, that's it. I guess I'm going to go on this giant search and try and find some place in the universe of the internet that's doing good news with no politics and no ads. Because that's the other thing that we haven't talked about, is that there's an agenda behind almost every single thing you find on the internet. And when I searched for 2 weeks for some place where I could get positive news with no agenda and no politics, I finally just started doing it myself. Like I said, I started the Goodness Exchange, and then when my daughter graduated from college, she graduated from Harvard in 2015. She joined me, and then we were like two zenith women, just pointing to what's right with the world as fast as we could. And so I've supported that website and all that it's done single-handedly all these years, because I didn't want to get anybody's bias. I could have probably taken on an angel investor or three, or a corporate sponsor or something, but I really felt like I wanted to give back to the world the good fortune that I found, and I made it work in our budget. And then the thing didn't have to be tainted by the other agenda except what it was built to do, which was give people some faith in the future and each other.
You are a gift to the world.
I
Thank
don't know.
you.
I feel like I don't have a choice to do what I do every day. And I bet you're the same way, Darrin. I've talked to so many thought leaders on this podcast who, once you feel the benefit of having a positive worldview and the connection to others and the joy that we can bring each other, it's impossible to stop. Am I right?
It's impossible. And it's just one of those things. You want people to see it and feel it as well. And it's hard when people are not there. And we have to keep moving forward to help people, experience that. But people have to experience it themselves to understand, wow, it's not only possible, it's every day. And it could be often throughout the day, because if we're helping people, they see it, they light up. I mean, it's just right. It's really a ripple effect. It's quite amazing. And it's truly a level of transcendence that it's hard to explain.
I believe that every single one of us has something that we're uniquely built to contribute. This is the thing. It doesn't have to be anything that looks like what you and I are doing, or Matthew Lee, who's in charge of Harvard's Center for Human Flourishing. Now that's a guy. It doesn't have to be anything big like that. It can be something little, like every day checking in on an elderly neighbor. And it can be, just
Yeah.
seeing that your town has a gardening problem and doing it yourself just for the
Yeah.
heck of it. Or it can be, taking care of a neighbor kid whose parents aren't there after school. There's just something in each of us that we're uniquely built to contribute. And I think it's important, at least the journey, to start looking for that.
There's opportunity everywhere, wherever people are, to your point. And I think at the end of the day, we all come from different places. We go down different paths, yet there's a commonality that's super connected. It's interconnected when we think about the joy and the love we have as a human race. And I think the journey that you're on, like I remember reading somewhere about your parents or caretakers themselves, they serve humanity, and you're carrying that forward, which is beautiful. And you're showing us that humanity does exist.
Yeah. And isn't that sort of like the free thing, the easy thing, the most obvious thing that each of us can do every day is just, open somebody's car door if they're juggling their 5 grocery bags, or, put the cart back, or run it up to the girl who's pushing 25 carts and putting it right at the front end. There's like a million small things that we can do each day that make a difference in the way the next person operates. And that, I don't know. It's just so easy. You got to kind of get out of your habits. Just decide to look for a different world than the one you've been seeing, because it's all there. That's a whole nother thing, right? There's a 8.7 billion definitions of reality now, so might as well go with it and choose our reality.
Yeah. I mean, all of it comes back to, where we are and what really connects with each of us. And, people have heard this from me, and what you're saying is that we just got to connect with that and start somewhere. And you said habits. It's funny, as you're saying the word habits, I'm thinking of the book called The Power of Habits, and the nature of changing a habit, or at least expanding or adding a habit, is really that element of what you're saying. Try something, actually feel good about it. Maybe you'll get some feedback, or you'll see there's some level of gift that comes back to you, because there's so much research about helping and serving others, and how it really extends our ability to look at life differently. It slows us down. Actually, it's another form of pause. Actually, it's a proven gift where it slows us down to actually notice what's happening. Because when we notice what's happening, we truly stay present. I mean, that's a gift in itself. And I think just slowing down to do that, it's going to keep repeating itself. And then we're going to want to do more. And that's the habit. That's the habit you and I are in. It's not just a habit, it's now a ritual. It's spiritual in nature. I mean, I know people understand like this next level. And that's what I feel like this is. We start to slow down and see what's truly there. There's the beauty, there's the possibilities. You actually sit down with people when you take out your chair and ask more to understand where that beauty is, but you do it. Like you take the steps, and that's what people can do, whatever that is in their part of the world.
Let's talk about something that you talk about a lot, because I think it's super important. It may be the most important thing that you talk about, is getting comfortable outside your comfort zone. Like, we just have to make ourselves, like I used to say, I'll give you an example. I used to say that I hated driving. I just hated driving. Anything over 2 hours, I was out. I just hated driving. And then we had a big calamity on the family farm back in Illinois. It's a 19-hour drive, and I had to drive back and forth. My mom was dying for a long time, and
Yeah.
other things on the family farm. So I just couldn't afford to jump on an airplane all the time. So I got to doing that drive. I can't wait till the next 19-hour drive I have. I discovered books on tape, biographies in particular, read by the author. If anybody's wants to get into something, it's just incredible to listen to an author, somebody you've heard of. You know, it's just incredible it feels like they're sitting in a seat beside you for 19 hours telling you their story. And since I love people's stories, it's so beautiful. But what I'm saying is, as long as I was telling myself all those years, telling myself that I hated driving, that I was leaving this part of my now such enjoyable life experience, I was just leaving on the table. It was just gold left on the table, as long as I was telling myself that story over and over again and never challenging my comfort zone on it. And then I picked the best book ever on my first 19-hour drive, and I drove it straight through. I was going to stop and break it in two, and I didn't. I just left at 5 a.m. and got there at midnight or something.
That's funny how we get locked in. I got to listen to that as well. That's great. And I love that expansion, to your point. Like, that's where growth came for me, as you know, and when I figured out that I needed to not have all the answers and needed to get uncomfortable with knowing that differences were actually strengths and opportunities to discover the world in a whole different way. People, the beauty, the love in the world. that's when things became the moment of change for me. And like I just drew a picture as we were talking. I don't know if you could see it, but it's just this, this little dot here. And then you take one step and you kind of go out further and further. It's expansive and just really allowing yourself to welcome in the world, see a little bit differently. And the beauty about this is when you actually look at this, it's actually a ripple effect, right? Depending on what you define in between. And then when you get out to the end, I asked my kids this when I showed them this drawing one day. I said, what does this look like? They said, well, it's a big, one-eyed smile, which is the logo on a big one-eyed smile, which is the logo on the show. And then my son said, well, Dad, it's like when you go out to the end, you have this big, big smile at the end. Because the further you go out and expand yourself, you're going to have more joy and happiness in the world. And it's like, I asked them these questions and they're like, oh my God, this is what it looks like to me. And they said, Dad, this is like a big radar. It's like a radar where you're actually, like you said earlier, you have the catcher's mitts up, right? You have the radar, you're willing to expand and you're willing to actually move out in the world. And that is it. That's the beauty. And it's everything you were saying. Like you and I are on the same page. That's why I was so excited to talk about what you're doing and what's possible. We came at this from different places, and so many other humans are doing that too, and so many more can.
Yeah, I really think it's examining your limiting beliefs. If that's it, like I could give you 1,000 examples. Almost every 2 weeks I say, "Ah, I can't believe I thought that way." And it was just 2 weeks ago. Like what if we all, here's a proposition. What if we all celebrated being wrong? Here's what this work has taught me in 10 years. I love to be wrong. It's my favorite state of being, to be wrong. Think about this. So if I thought, for instance, I interviewed this guy, Chris Brown. He has the most incredible voice I've ever heard. It's like Barry White from the 70s mixed with Darth Vader, and he's the deepest velvety voice, but more velvety than that. And he has a life. He's been incarcerated. He's been homeless, all this stuff. And now he's a voiceover guy, but his story is shocking. And I had to be willing to listen to somebody who's been incarcerated and homeless and care about their opinion and find them fascinating before I could ever like be at that level, because it's so easy to judge, right? So what if we all just looked at our limiting beliefs and tried to think about how limiting they are? Because they're limiting us from hearing the stories and perspectives of others that just cause us to leap to the next way of thinking. That's what being wrong is to me. Is when I realize how wrong I was, I'm just like, and then I feel like I'm on a new planet. I'm like your ripple drawing. Every time you're wrong, you get to hop out there to one of those ripples and hop out there and hop out there. So if we could create, if there was one thing that I could change in the world, just one, I think it would be it would take some thought to articulate this just right so you didn't get in trouble with it. But I think it would be like a badge of courage to celebrate being wrong. For all of us, to not mean it was vulnerability to be wrong, but it means it was like courage and it was like wonder to admit that you're wrong. Oh, think what that would change in politics and business and how we raise our children and just everything. If it was a prize to be able to say, "Oh, I was so wrong. Now here's how I think."
That's incredible. And it's just a good way of, you talk about the catcher's mitt again, like you're allowing yourself to hear it differently and taking these perspectives to a whole different place and your willingness to be wrong and looking at this as a learning journey. How do we get better from it? How do we discover? Because that is where the amazing stuff happens. It
It's
really is.
always where the amazing stuff happens.
It
Yeah.
does. And when we allow ourselves that if you could be the first as a leader to demonstrate that, because I was always trained, you couldn't be wrong. I couldn't ask other people for help, but I couldn't say, I don't know, or it was crazy.
Actually, I've got another story for you. Okay. So when I first started on this journey, I was all full of myself. I was this big, like, that's it. I was telling everybody because of the NPR story with the beheading. For years at this, I was saying, that's it. We all need to just turn off the negative news. If they're not going to tell us anything good, let's just turn it off. That hits them right where they live, right? So my son went off to college and he played basketball at Wesleyan down in your neck of the woods. And so the first football game, we got to meet all the parents of all the players. And so don't I walk in there and I start talking to this African American woman who's super bright and super nice and stuff, all about the negative news. And I was going on and on about the negative news. And she was very, that's interesting. She was kind of like encouraging me. And then she says to me, when I gave her half a minute, she says, "Can I improve your way of thinking?" Oh. And because I like to be wrong, I said, "Of course." She was one of the top 5 editors of NPR,
Oh,
of all of NPR, the top 5 editors. And she's the only African American female editor of the Chicago Tribune. Her husband likes to say there's this long hallway at the Chicago Tribune, and it's the editors, old white guy, old white guy, old white guy with a beard, old white guy with a beard, old white guy, old white guy. And then there's, I'm not going to say her name. Oh my gosh, I could not believe it. So she says, "Can I improve your way of thinking? I'm an editor at NPR." I later went out and looked, and she is the editor at NPR. Anyway, she told me so many great things about what would have happened in our world if journalists hadn't been putting their lives on the line to expose stories like Watergate and worse, and how much bravery it took, 50 years ago during the civil rights movement to report on anything. Like, I mean, she just gave me quite a 20-minute, and I changed my tune. I never said that to anyone again. And then I never forgot her statement, "Can I improve your way of thinking?" So that's a tip I'd love to tell everybody. In our office, in the dental office, that has been the number one, how do we get along? One of the questions on your pre-list was, what does joy look like at work? And you haven't asked me it yet, but what I was going to tell you was, joy at work looks like when people are constantly open to other people improving their way of thinking. And they ask for it. Like my staff now will say, Aaron, my COO, will go up to somebody and say, "I was thinking about spending the afternoon working on a spreadsheet for this, that, and the other. Improve my way of thinking on that." And the person will always say something to her that changes her entire plan. That's positive and good. And thank God she asked, or she would have wasted her afternoon, right? So how about the second thing, if I could wave a magic wand, besides everybody liking to be wrong? I think if people had an attitude that almost everyone could improve their way of thinking, what would that world look like? That would be something, huh?
yeah. And, it's establishing the language that makes it safe for us to step into that level of conversation or wonder what could be.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Dr. Lynda, anything else you'd like to share with our audience today before we sign off? Because this has been wonderful.
I don't know. I think I've run on quite a lot.
I have to say, I could talk with you all day. It's like I said, you're a breath of fresh air. You've given us a lot of tips and great ideas today. And we're going to share, folks, your website, how to reach you, how to connect with you, how to stay in touch to make sure we're following up on your TEDx, which you're gonna crush it. So I'm so honored to be a friend of yours. And I had a blast on your podcast, which I know will be out by the time this is launched. So, hey, I love what you're doing, and I admire what you're doing. So thank you so much.
Let me tell people what date. Your June 16th is when we publish your podcast. And I'm telling you, I did the editing with my producer yesterday. It is magnificent. It just really is it's one of my favorites, Darrin. So you just totally nailed it. And you share so many things that are so important. Thank you so much for doing what you do in the world. Can I leave people with one more little gift?
Please.
Okay, there's a TED Talk that I think is one of the most important ones that anybody who loves your work or mine would love. It's by a Nat Geo photographer named DeWitt Jones. Look up the TED Talk by DeWitt Jones called "Celebrate What's Right with the World." Funny, beautiful. It will change you. It will help you see a little bit more of what I'm saying when I say celebrate what's right with the world and go seek it out.
You are a gift, and thanks for all the treasures today. So thanks again. Great to see you.
Okay. All right. Have a great day.
That's all for today's episode. If you liked the show, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Live Your Possible dares to unlock your fullest potential and become an avenue for others to do the same. Join the community by visiting ignitehappy.com. It's time to discover endless possibilities with equal opportunity for all. See you again next week for more insights on how you can live your possible.